Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the Digital Mapmakers Academy. I'm Paul Postal. This is going to be the beginning of a three-part series, and today in part one, I'm going to be interviewing Kell, a professional mapmaker from Kellerica Maps. There's some good information for those of you who are just starting to use Photoshop to make your own maps, so stay tuned, don't go anywhere. As I mentioned in my introduction, I do have Kell from Kellerica Maps on the channel with me today for this episode. And so, Kell, I just want to thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, so want to ask you a couple of questions about a little bit about yourself and how you got started in map making, and then we'll go into the demonstration that you have prepared for us today. So the application that you're going to be using is Photoshop. How did you get started using Photoshop?
Well, my parents are both graphic designers. They have had their own business ever since I was a child. So I kind of always knew Photoshop was a thing that existed. And I actually did have my own copy of Photoshop Elements from a fairly young age. And I kind of had access to that already. And I just kind of, when I was looking into how to make maps digitally anyway, Photoshop was kind of already what I was leaning towards. And then I was lucky enough to find some good resources to actually get me started. And I kind of never have wandered too far off from it since. I have tried out different things over the years, but I kind of always just keep returning back to Photoshop. It just like in some ways it is just, as I said, I have just not found anything that would be as good.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. And so, what do you exactly use Photoshop? I mean, obviously for map making,
Mm.
but with your maps, I mean, what is the purpose of your maps, and is it just one single thing, or is there multiple things that you're making maps for?
Uh, Depends a lot. I do a lot of commissions these days, and I think the largest part of my clientele is currently authors. So often my maps do just go into fantasy novels,
Oh, okay.
and also do work sometimes with role players and GMs who kind of want to have their world illustrated for the campaigns that they're running. So some of my maps definitely have been featured in home games as well.
And with game masters or GMs or DMs, what have you, reaching out to you to make commissions for their maps. Well, let me first of all say this. The reason I'm asking this question is because I've used Photoshop a little bit. I'm not terribly
Mm-hmm.
familiar with it for my own maps. I've used different programs like Wonder Draft. I've used Incarnate, things like that, and I've never really been fully satisfied with the maps that I have made. So my
Mm-hmm.
question I have there is: have you ever had any GMs who have sent the maps they've made and
Mm-hmm.
said, "This map just completely sucks. Can you take this and just make it better?"
Very often, yeah, both for GMs and both for authors as well. That is often how they word it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. And then for the authors, is it mainly authors who are, is it authors that are globally, or is it just mainly restricted to Europe where you're at, or all over the
No,
place?
pretty much all over. I think actually most of my clients have been from the States.
So how do these authors and GMs, how do they tend to find you and your website? Is it mainly just by a Google search?
Uh, I would imagine that most of the new people probably do come from my socials these days. So Instagram, Twitter, what have you.
Okay.
And actually, a lot of my author clients have kind of been pretty much snowballing from like the one client that I had years ago. I kind of just like applied for someone who was looking for a map on the Cartographers Guild forum, and ever since then, like they have kind of just recommended me to other people, and I just keep getting new people coming. Oh yeah, I heard that you made maps for this and this author and for this and this book, and like could
Okay.
you make one for me as well? So it's kind of sometimes it can just kind of be like finding that one good connection can really help
Okay.
help you a long way.
And then tell me about Photoshop. What is it about Photoshop that why do you think you keep coming back to Photoshop when it comes to making maps?
I think it's mainly like kind of ironically. it is the fact that it's not really a map making software. It is just a like graphics editing software, and a really powerful one at that. So it's kind of just the flexibility of it. You can do so many different things with it, whereas things like WonderDraft and such are kind of limited to doing exactly the thing that they're designed to do, and they do it fairly well. But with Photoshop, you can do basically anything. From you can do a very hand-drawn style map, or you can just go completely in the opposite direction and go for a very realistic satellite style and that kind of thing. Like it's the possibilities of what it can do are just endless once you actually figure out how to use it.
Okay. Yeah, because I think you and I talked about before we started recording that Photoshop does have a pretty steep, learning
Mm-hmm.
curve into it.
It does, yes.
How long do you think would you say it took you to actually pick up Photoshop to use it decently?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say it did take me at least 3 years with it before I started getting to a point where I actually was happy with my own work at all. But then again, I'm always been very, very critical of my own work. So that probably does affect, probably if you aren't quite as bad as I am, it probably wouldn't take you quite as long.
Okay.
And for me, honestly, the biggest game changer was when I got my the tablet that I'm currently using now, because I never could quite. I was using an ancient Wacom, just like a little like one of those not display tablets, just an ancient Wacom Intuos. And then I got my Cintiq, which is the more sturdy monitor that you see here, and that kind of made all of the difference for me. Kind of like being able to take that step.
What is your process? Let's talk about first of all. Let's talk about with your commission works with your clients, and let's talk about what you do personally. Is there a difference in your process there?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
It's my with my personal work, I tend to be much more in basically in the way that you just described, where I kind of just jump into it and make it up as I go along. And sometimes I end up finishing, sometimes I don't. It's just about kind of going and see where it takes me. Whereas with commissions, it's so much more like goal oriented, if that makes any sense. It's just like you do have a very specific target in mind,
Okay.
and it's just about taking the steps to get there. And
Okay.
often the clients themselves have a very clear idea of what they want. And like obviously there's always room for some creativity on my end, but sometimes less than others. So
Gotcha.
it
Okay.
is just about like making a plan and sticking to the plan.
What is for map makers who are just starting in with Photoshop? What do you think would be the biggest time saver for them?
Me personally, the best thing that I ever learned when I started using Photoshop to do my maps is to fight my own instincts on how big I think the map needs to be. And that, as far as I can see, that tends to be a mistake that a lot of other people make as well. So in the beginning, especially when we are approaching digital software as someone who hasn't done that a huge amount of work like that before, we just tend to imagine that we need to have a huge amount of room to work in, and it usually doesn't actually need to be nowhere near as big as you think it does.
Okay.
So just like, yeah, if you are just starting out, estimate how big you think the map needs to be, and then at least half that. Just save yourself, save your computer, save your software. You are just
Right.
putting it's just going to make things a lot easier if you work a bit smaller. That's
Okay.
the only way I personally ever started to get anywhere with my maps, is when I stopped trying to create the insanely huge maps that I tried to create originally.
Yeah, and I fell into that trap as well the first time that I made a map for a homebrew D&D game,
Mm.
my own world, and I was like, okay, I'm going to start from the outside and work my way in. And then I was like, I'll just, kind of fill in details as we go through each play session as I make stuff up as we go.
Mm.
But you're right, you'd have to have the determination to completely fill that in. And then another thing that I realized was I was trying to have this one single map have everything in it. I was trying to have my continent size map have like every single major city, every single small village, every single town. I was trying to cram all that in. And then when I found out when you get into started having to label everything, trying to
Oh.
figure out how to get the text around there and figure,
Mm.
and I was like, okay, I was like, Paul, just stop. Your continent doesn't have to show everything. You know, just
Mm-hmm.
have your major cities, your major rivers, and go with that. Thanks again to Kell for joining me for this interview. Next week, we're going to pick up at the beginning of his demo of using Photoshop for coloring and texturing a map. If you like this episode, please be sure to click subscribe and also the dingy bell so you'll get notified when a new video comes out. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time on the Digital Mapmakers Academy.